In today's report, which is on the cusp of the weekend, we're going to deep dive into exactly what DIYers fail to understand about this, the mighty Excalibur of the home mechanics toolkit, the cheap-ass Chinese tube-type torque wrench. That's next. I'm John Cadogan from AutoExpert.com.au, and I get new cars Australia only webs. God. If there's one thing that I know that ordinary mortals are unaware of about their home toolkit, is that there's a really critical operational aspect to all torque wrenches. And it doesn't matter if it's the Chinese torque wrench for $50 on eBay or one of these really high quality, beautiful to use Warren and Brown jobbies, which is a quality Australian company. These things are a real step up, but they operate on exactly the same principle. And that means they're vulnerable to getting the torque spectacularly wrong if you put your hand in the wrong place. And I know a lot of people are going to go, well, who would do that? There's a hand grip here. And there absolutely is a hand grip here. Yeah, I agree with that. The hand grip is incidentally the same place on all torque wrenches. This is a spectacularly cheap jobby from eBay. Same sort of deal. It's very difficult to get the hand position wrong, you'd think, except when you get into an imperfect environment where everything is constrained and you can't reach something properly. It would be easy, I think, to be wielding a large implement like this under a car, and let's put it in perspective about the kind of way that people use tools in the real world. If you're a mechanic, you've got a hoist, you get the car up here. It's really easy to use the tools. But when you're using a couple of jack stands and you've only got this much clearance and you're lying on your back on cold, wet concrete, it's easy to get this in a compromised position, and you might be motivated, for example, to choke up on it like this. And if you do that, the torque that it delivers when the mechanism goes click will be spectacularly wrong. And in the case of choking up, it's going to be too tight. Okay, so you will overcrank the fastener if you apply the torque like this, choked up on it. Today's video is brought to you by the mighty Bluetti AC200 Max. It is a beast. You can use it to power your life when the grid goes down. If you need to build something off the grid, the AC200 Max will keep most tools just humming along and all of the batteries charged up as well. Plus, it's got a heap of USB outlets, including high-powered USB-C for laptops, as well as 12 volts DC and 2 inductive charge pads on top. You can feed it solar from a panel to keep it topped up out in the boonies, and charging it up using the mains is a breeze as well. You get 2200 watts of pure sine wave, 240 volts AC electricity, which will surge up to 4800 watts briefly for appliances that really kick in. It's got the super stable lithium iron phosphate battery chemistry that's good for roughly 10 years of daily recharging to 80% capacity. You get just over 2 kilowatt hours of battery storage capacity, but you can add up to 2 B230 expansion battery modules if you need more, and that's going to essentially double or triple the storage capacity for 1 or 2 modules respectively. This is a heavy-duty unit, but it just works out of the box. You can have it on standby at home, you can put it in the ute for work, or in the 4x4 for camping. And it's going to fit in the boat and the caravan as well. I've been using mine for well over a year now. It's ticking over right now, in fact, keeping Satan's distinctive inverted 3-prong logo illuminated for your viewing pleasure. So, the AC200 Max is $900 off right now, and you can get a further 3% discount using the link below in the description and the code AEJC3 on checkout. I've used the AC200 Max for Fat Cave woodwork and metalwork extravaganzas, and I'll link to those reports below as well. That complex, expensive, cobbled together dual battery setup you were gonna build, might be time to rethink that. The AC200 Max just works right out of the box, and it'll keep the lights on and the fridge humming along at home silently during a power failure. Links and code in the description below. If you put a piece of pipe on the end, it's going to go in the other direction and not be tight enough. And it's going to be the same click in the mechanism. And it doesn't matter if it's a really nice torque wrench, a really cheap Chinese torque wrench like this baby here, or something in the middle from, say, Force, which is a Taiwanese brand. And trust me when I say that these Force tools, which I get from a joint called Trade Tools in Queensland, they got great shipping all around Australia, and they're not sponsoring this video. I've just bought a bunch of shit from them. These Force tools from Taiwan are really excellent value for the money also. Warren and Brown for the win, but you're going to pay a hefty sum for it. Force is just awesome for value and quality. If the intersection of value and quality matters to you and you want to be at the value end and not overspend on a tool that frankly most DIYers are not going to use all that often, then Force is pretty good. Hashtag none of this is sponsored, okay? The bottom line here is that you need to realize that unless your hand is exactly in the right spot on the wrench, the torque will be wrong when it goes click. This is for these tube type torque wrenches. So I guess to make sense of this, we should probably pull one apart and have a little look at what's inside, because it's really just a calibrated clicky mechanism. There's nothing more complex in a torque wrench than that. They don't need to be treated as if they're some kind of tremendous precision instrument, but there are a few things you've got to be careful of. So I pulled this one apart earlier, and here's what you find inside one of these babies. You basically just find a drop-forged wrench married to a tube with a pin. Okay, so the pin is just keeping the tube together with the wrench, just like that, right? So there's your assembly at the top. When you pull the pin out, the tube comes loose from the drop forged wrench, and this really is just like every other ratchet that you have ever used in your life. It just doesn't have a particularly useful handle. But what it does have, and I hope you'll be able to see this, is like a forged end with a hardened pin embedded in it, and it's on a ramp. And all of these things really matter, because what it interacts with at the other end of the ramp is a matching sort of ramp, just like that, with a roller on it, and I hope you can see that okay as well. I'm not entirely sure, but I have been paying attention, but I'm just not sure if you can see that properly. This is just a container with a ground flat end on the end of it, and this roller, hardened roller with a pin through it at this end, and a matching kind of ramp. And I hope you can see that okay. So actually the clicky mechanism here is just this roller clicking over the pin when you get to a predetermined torque, right? That's just what happens here. The roller climbs the ramp, clicks on the pin, and all of a sudden you know to let go. And what provides the load is the spring. And the cool thing about the spring, which just sits in the tube like that, the compression of the spring, the load in the spring varies with the compression, and it's more or less directly proportional within an operational range. And that's kind of lucky, because the handle here moves on a thread at the end of the rod, and the pitch of the thread is constant, so you can change the compression of the spring, which changes the torque setting of the wrench. And then all of a sudden you've got all of this together. I'll just put these little bits aside. Pro tip, if you've got little bits put aside because you've got something apart for a reason and you don't want to lose them all, then put them on one of these magnetic trays. These magnetic trays are freaking awesome for not losing small parts all over the floor of your own fat cave. And if you want to put the spring in one, there's a bigger one over there. You can use it for that. And then all I do is I raid the kitchen. I make my wife think she's going insane. And I go, Tupperware container? No. What are you talking about? I've been downstairs. You can't lose any of the little bits, no matter how long it takes you to fix your frickin' torque wrench. because you've got another 7 operational ones and it's, hey, really not a priority. So that's good as well. Now, what happens here, okay, is the thing you've got to recognise is that there's not one torque in play here, but there's 2. There's an activation torque for the clicky mechanism, and the activation torque for the clicky mechanism goes from the pin where the pivot is to the line of action of your hand. So that's 1 length and 1 load. But the wrench goes from here to your hand. So it operates through a different length. And with this torque wrench, and most torque wrenches, it's about 50 millimeters or 2 inches worth of difference, right? So I had a careful look at this wrench, and basically what we're talking about here is, I wrote the dimensions down, it's 370. It depends what the torque setting is, because obviously the hand grip climbs up and down as you adjust the torque. But in the case of a mid-range torque setting here, it's 370 millimeters, so that's about 15 inches in the old money, more or less. 2 inches less, or 50 millimeters less for clicky mechanism. That means same load, but duos, different torques, because you've got 2 different lengths. You've got this length here for the actual fastener, torque being supplied to the fastener, and you've got this length here for torque being supplied to the clicky mechanism, and they're different lengths. So the designers of a torque wrench have to figure out the numerical relationship between the torque being applied to clicky mechanism and translate that into what the torque is at the fastener, because they operate through different lengths. Makes sense, right? In the case of this particular torque wrench, if it's 370 and 320, the 2 different lengths, same load, because obviously pressing down, it's the same load on the effort side of things, but 2 different lengths, okay? The difference is 16%. So there's 16% more torque at the fastener than there is for the clicky mechanism. So if you set the torque wrench to 100 Newton meters, then basically that's going to be 16% more than the torque that makes the mechanism go click. I hope that makes sense, because the 2 different lengths really matter. Now, if you're lying on your back under the car, right, and the space is constrained and everything's imperfect, and instead of grabbing the torque wrench here and applying the load, let's say you grab the torque wrench here. You just have to choke up on it a bit, and you're going to muscle it around and wait for the click. The problem with that is it's no longer the proportional relationship of like 370 and 320, right? The relationship is, let's say, 250 and 200. And when that happens, the torque at the fastener is 25% more than the torque that you're applying to the clicky mechanism. And the setting on the torque wrench hasn't changed, dude, because you're just choking up on it here. The spring is the same, and little rolly anvil inside the thing is the same, and the ramp with the pin in it attached to this bit is the same. It doesn't know that you've changed hand positions. It's just keyed to go click at a particular torque relative to this pivot, right? What you've done is change the proportional relationship between the 2 torques. So instead of going click at 16% higher torque, it's now going to go click at 25% higher torque. And that's a real problem, because you're going to be over cranking the frickin' fastener, and that's dogs and cats living together, rivers running as blood, ScoMo coming back to be minister for frickin' everything. And nobody wants that. And it doesn't matter what kind of fastener you're using here. Obviously, I'm only talking about fasteners that are concentric with the drive. There's another thing that could catch you out with the torque wrench, such as this. So these are all concentric. You know, you can have these M18 spliney fasteners for different suspension components, and you can use T70 fasteners as well. It doesn't matter. And you can use an extension that's as long as you like. It does not matter as long as it's concentric. The thing that can really dick with you is if you ever get motivated to put one of these crow's foot wrenches on the end of the torque wrench, because then you are changing the relationship as well between the lengths of the two torques, also not in a good way. So if you do this kind of thing, and I'll just make it really apparent, what you're doing is you're moving the effort even further away. And that's just going to be the same kind of imperfect result. I mean, if you've got to do that, don't even use a torque wrench. Or if you do, then why not do it like this, okay? In the extreme situation where you might want to use a crow's foot type wrench on a torque wrench, then orient it this way, dude, because that doesn't change the distance between the two torques. It doesn't change their proportionality. The distance between here and here is the same as it would be if you just had a concentric fastener, because all you've done is move the center line over here ever so slightly. You haven't moved it this way or this way, and that's the distance that really matters. And you have to know this. And I know people have all these arguments around campfires with a couple of beers under their belt, and half of the tribe is going, nah mate, that doesn't make any difference, beard stroking, and the other half is going, yeah, it does. They often paid more attention at school than the half that can't see that this makes a difference. But it makes a huge difference. And if you're going to go to the trouble of using a torque wrench, then you need to know that so that it's all just not in vain. Never choke up on the torque wrench. I was actually reading the documentation that came with some of these wrenches, and roughly half of them say, although they don't spell out the reason, roughly half of them say that you've got to have your hand in the right place. Now, before I let you go, one final cheery thought about torque wrenches. People seem to think, and I don't know why, that this is the end that needs protecting. And really, this bit of your torque wrench, right, it's just a ratchet. It's like every other ratchet you've ever used in every other socket set. There are good ones and bad ones, but that's not the precision thing. It's just got a pawl inside it, and it just goes click and slips and then grabs when you turn it the other way. So, woohoo. The bit that needs protecting, the precision bit, counterintuitively, is the inside of this tube. And it's the inside of this tube near this hole right here, because the inside of this tube is the registration surface that this set screw registers against. Basically, you adjust this screw, it changes the calibration of the torque wrench, and the registration surface is the inside of the tube. So, if you let your torque wrench loose in the back of your ute and it interacts with all kinds of heavy crap in between times that you need your torque wrench, or if your workshop is just utter chaos, pot calling kettle black, I know, but if it is, and your torque wrench could absorb the impact energy of something that falls on it, something big and heavy perhaps one day, then that's a disaster for the calibration of your torque wrench, because if you bend this bit of the tube, even by a bee's dick, that will change the calibration, and it's not a throwaway, but you have to go through the whole pain in the ass torque wrench calibration procedure. And I'll do a separate video on that if you want. It's not that hard. All you need is some home gym weights for a torque wrench like this baby here, about 450 long, which is 200-ish Newton meters, I guess. Then you probably need 25 kilos of weights. Probably need a set of bathroom scales to calibrate those, and a bench vise that's adequately bolted to a bench, and just some other crap that you've got lying around. That'll be fine. You can actually do a shit-hot job calibrating a torque wrench if you've just got those things. You don't need to send it away. There's no special voodoo. Let me know in the comments if you want to do that. But this is why you should probably hang on to the HDPE case, the blow molded jigger that the torque wrench came in, because it'll stop you bending the tube and destroying the calibration. And I guess you can only know what you know. If the torque wrench doesn't cop a major hit and doesn't appear to be particularly bent, but is bent just a bit, how are you even going to know, right? So keep your torque wrench protected against the slings and arrows of that kind of disruption of this relatively delicate surface on the inside of the tube, and it won't need recalibrating conceivably for quite some time. Now, the big thing here to realise is hand position really matters. Forget about all the beard strokers who can't see why it does. Clearly it does, because the torque wrench is delivering duos different torques to get the job done, and it's the proportional relationship of torque uno to torque duos that really matters. And if you go fucking around with the lengths, you're going to change that relationship, and not for the better. Definitely not by choking up on it, and it's probably even worse if you put a bit of pipe on the end. I say it this way, don't misinterpret what I'm saying. It's not okay to overcrank the fastener, and it's not okay not to do it up enough. However, I would suggest that in the domain of what's less okay, it's really less okay not to do it up enough, because that's a pathway to failure for all high tensile joints. They'll vibrate loose, and if that happens, wheels come off cars, gas is not retained inside the cylinder head, whatever, combustion chamber. It's a disaster, okay? Whereas in reality, and this is not advice, but in reality, overcranking a fastener a little bit more really won't hurt the whole show, because there's a lot of tolerance in between the torque setting, the tension at the torque setting, and the failure of the fastener. I did not just say it's okay intentionally to overcrank a fastener. It's not. It's called a safety margin, all right? Now, you've got to realise that we whip out torque wrenches in industry to tighten up bolts in situations where the clamping force of the bolt really matters, because the torque is closely-ish related to the stretch in the bolt, and because of Young's modulus, look it up, Wikipedia knows everything, because of Young's modulus, the stretch in the bolt is directly proportional to the clamping force, like the tension, right? And that's what you're trying to do with a high tensile joint. You're getting clamping force involved to just keep parts together, where it's a disaster if they come apart, okay? And now you know another part of the secret sauce that makes the world work, and my work here is done. Definitely do not make that mistake in the driveway at home.